The antiseptic smell hit her before anything else did. Sharp and clinical and completely wrong for a ballroom. Not the cleaning supply wrong of a hotel kitchen. The precise prepared wrong of a syringe pre-loaded and waiting. Neva Langford had worked the trauma bay at St. Michael's for 3 years, and she knew that smell the way a sommelier knew a corked bottle. She just hadn't expected to find it at a 5-star fundraiser. But that was 40 minutes into the evening. Before that, her only job was to keep the champagne flutes full and stay invisible. The Fairmont Royal York sat at the foot of Bay Street like it had always owned the city, and was merely waiting for the rest of Toronto to catch up. Its grand ballroom, gilded ceilings, crystal chandeliers, the kind of carpet that swallowed sound and pretension in equal measure, had been rented out for the Meridian Foundation's annual gala. Philanthropists, Bay Street lawyers, cabinet ministers who'd flown in from Ottawa and were already on their 3rd drink. The kind of room where nobody talked about money directly, because having enough of it made directness gauche. Neva had taken the catering shift because she needed $500. Not for herself. Her brother Reese was 23 years old, incurably charming and catastrophically bad at cards. 14 days ago, he'd walked into a private game in a Yorkville basement and walked out owing $60,000 to a man named Clement Farr. Neva hadn't known who Clement Farr was until yesterday morning, when 2 men in good overcoats arrived at her apartment on Bathurst Street and explained, very politely, that Reese had until Friday to produce a payment plan. To underline their seriousness, one of them had broken 2 of his fingers before leaving. It was now Thursday night. She had spent the day calling everyone she knew. Banks moved slowly. Friends didn't have that kind of money. She was standing in one of the most expensive rooms in the country, carrying a silver tray, completely out of options, until she walked past the northeast corner of the ballroom and stopped mid-step. She recognized him the same way she recognized a deteriorating patient across the ward. Instinctively, from a distance, with a certainty that outpaced the reasoning behind it. Alaric Stowe. She knew the name because Reese had said it quietly, after she'd pushed him for who Clement Farr ultimately answered to. "Stowe, don't, Neva. Don't even think about it." He'd said it the way you warned someone away from a downed hydro line. Not angry, just absolutely certain about what happened to people who got too close. Alaric Stowe occupied a cordoned enclave at the far end of the room, in a charcoal suit that made everyone around him look slightly underdressed and slightly anxious about it. He was 40, maybe 42, with the particular stillness of a man who hadn't been genuinely surprised in a long time. He didn't circulate. He didn't work the room. He watched it the way Neva had learned to watch an incoming trauma case, cataloging, categorizing, already preparing for the variable that hadn't declared itself yet. Standing at the perimeter of his section was Dex Carver. She'd clocked him 10 minutes into her shift. Tall, ex-military posture, eyes moving through the room in the systematic sweep of someone who'd been trained to find threats before they found him. Alaric Stowe's head of security, the second most dangerous man in the room. She should have kept walking. She told herself that twice, concisely, and kept walking anyway, toward the northeast corner. She made it 6 steps past the invisible line before Dex Carver moved in front of her. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't reach for anything. He simply materialized in her path with a calm that was professional and absolute. Staff access ends at the perimeter, flat rehearsed turnaround. Around them, the nearest cluster of guests had gone carefully quiet, monitoring the situation with the practiced inattention of people who acknowledged unpleasantness only when it became unavoidable. Neva didn't turn around. She kept her hands visible, her chin level, and looked past Dex's shoulder to where Alaric Stowe was now watching her with an expression that wasn't quite curiosity and wasn't quite boredom. Something in between. The look of a man who'd just noticed something unexpected in a room where he'd expected nothing unexpected at all. "I need 30 seconds with Mr. Stowe," she said, quietly enough to avoid a scene loudly enough to carry. "It concerns his safety tonight. If I'm wrong, I'll leave without another word and you'll never see me again." Dex took one step forward, the kind of step that meant this conversation is finished. Dex. The single word arrived from across the enclave with almost no volume behind it. But Dex heard it. He went very still. Then he moved to the side. Neva walked to the table. Alaric Stowe did not stand. He didn't adjust his posture or set his glass down. He looked at her the way she imagined he looked at everything, as an object to be assessed and then either dismissed or filed away for later use. 30 seconds, he said, from now. Neva reached into the crossbody bag she'd kept on all evening, her personal bag, the one she carried to every shift, and placed her hospital ID on the table in front of him. My name is Neva Langford. I'm an emergency nurse at St. Michael's. I've worked this venue 6 times over the past 2 years. I know the catering staff by sight. She kept her voice clinical, precise, the register she used for family updates in the trauma bay. 14 minutes ago, a man entered through the service corridor in a Meridian Foundation uniform. I have never seen him at this venue. I watched him spend 40 seconds adjusting the decanter on the bar cart assigned to your enclave. He was wearing latex gloves under his service gloves. She paused, and when he finished, he made eye contact with your head of security. Dex Carver nodded. She'd used 26 seconds. The ballroom continued around them. Someone laughed at something not particularly funny. The orchestra moved into a slow, close harmony standard. Alaric Stowe did not glance at the decanter. He did not look at Dex. He looked at Neva, and the assessment in his eyes sharpened into something colder and more specific. That's a serious accusation, he said, without any particular inflection. Yes, she agreed. Let me test the pour before anyone drinks from it. I carry reagent strips in my bag. I've treated enough poisoning presentations in the ER that I started keeping them on me. If the drink is clean, I walk away and this never happened. If it isn't, she held his gaze, then we have a different conversation. The silence that followed was perhaps 4 seconds. It felt significantly longer. She watched Alaric Stowe's eyes move, once briefly to Dex Carver. Dex's expression didn't change, but Neva had spent 3 years watching people hold their faces together in crisis. She knew the difference between calm and controlled. Dex Carver was controlling something, and she could see where he was holding it. The slight rigidity at the jaw, the way his breathing had slowed by 1 deliberate degree, the micro-tension across his shoulders that had been there since she'd walked past the perimeter and hadn't relaxed. Test it, Alaric said. The decanter sat on the cart 3 feet from the table. Neva moved to it with the focused economy of someone performing a procedure, aware that Dex was watching her hands and that Alaric was watching everything. She poured a 1/2 inch of whiskey into a clean glass, retrieved a reagent strip from her bag, and submerged it. The strip changed color in 11 seconds. She placed it on the edge of the cart and said nothing. Alaric looked at it for 2 seconds, just 2, and in that brief window she saw it, the slight reconstruction of his expression, a man revising his map of the evening in real time, the cold clarity of someone who'd half expected a variable and was now doing the arithmetic of who had delivered it and why. He reached into his jacket and retrieved a phone. He said 4 words into it, quiet and unhurried, in a language she didn't recognize. Then he stood. "We're leaving," he said. What happened next took less than 2 minutes and was designed to be invisible. 3 men appeared from different points around the room. No urgency, nothing that would register to a civilian as alarm, just a quiet, professional reorientation. Dex Carver's hand moved toward his jacket, and the man who appeared at his left elbow placed 1 hand on his arm and said something close to his ear. The orchestra played on. The guests circulated. Nobody screamed. Neva found herself moving through the ballroom toward the staff corridor, guided by a light, impersonal hand at her elbow. Alaric Stowe walked ahead. The chandeliers caught the back of his suit as he moved through the crowd, and people stepped aside without knowing why. The service corridor hit her with fluorescent light and the distant percussion of industrial dishwashers, cream tiles, exposed pipes, a cart of folded linens abandoned near the ice machine. She'd walked this corridor a dozen times. "Freight elevator is left at the end," she said. "Opens to the private parking structure on Front Street. There's a secondary exit to the north lobby if you need above ground." "I know the building," Alaric said. "I know you do," she said. "I'm telling you because the freight elevator is faster, and right now faster seems relevant." He looked at her sideways as they walked, just briefly, with the expression of a man recalibrating something. They took the freight elevator. The penthouse suite occupied the entire east wing of the upper floor, registered under the name of a numbered company in Ottawa. It was all dark walnut and cool grey linen, floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the lake. Toronto's skyline spread out below in winter brilliance, the CN Tower rising from the light haze like a lighthouse oriented at a coast only it could see. Snow had begun to fall, the first of the season, soft and tentative, blurring the city at its edges. Neva sat on the arm of a leather chair that probably cost more than her annual transit pass. Adrenaline was ebbing. It always did this, held her steady through the crisis and then retreated, leaving her hands slightly cold and her thoughts very precise. She'd learned to use the precision before the shaking arrived. 2 of Alaric's men had brought Dex Carver up in a separate elevator. He stood near the entrance in his suit, composed, unreadable, his hands at his sides. He hadn't looked at Neva directly since the ballroom. She'd been watching him peripherally anyway. Alaric stood at the window with a glass of water he hadn't touched. "Who was the man at the cart?" he asked the room. Dex said nothing. "He's connected to Clement Farr," Neva said. Dex's eyes came to her. Just a quarter-second of movement, controlled and immediately suppressed. But she'd been waiting for it, the way she waited for the involuntary wince that told her where the pain actually was. "I know Clement Farr's name," she said, "because he's why I'm here." She told Alaric about Riss. She told it the way she gave family updates in the ER. Facts first, context second, request last, nothing embellished. The poker game. The $60,000, the men at her door on Bathurst. Riss's taped fingers, the Friday deadline. "I came tonight because I had nothing left to try," she said. "I was going to ask you to intervene, but then I noticed the server at the cart." She paused, and the poisoning was more urgent. "So you led with that instead." "It's called triage," she said. The almost smile arrived at the corner of his mouth and decided not to fully commit. He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "You photographed him. The server." She hadn't mentioned that. She reached into her bag and set her phone on the coffee table, open to the image she'd taken instinctively while passing the bar cart. Her gut had registered wrong before her brain had caught up, and she'd learned to trust the 2-second decisions. The image wasn't crisp, but it showed the server's hands, and it showed Dex Carver's profile angled toward him, and it showed the slight forward tilt of Dex's chin that she'd read, at the time, as some kind of acknowledgement and filed away to think about later. Alaric studied the photograph. "His hands," Neva said. "Your man's, look at them." Everyone in the room looked at Dex Carver's hands. His knuckles were over-scrubbed, dry, slightly raw at the cuticles, the particular texture of someone who'd been washing compulsively for several days. She'd noticed it when he'd stopped her at the perimeter, clocked it the same way she clocked every detail that landed slightly wrong, and the meaning of it had assembled itself only now. She saw it in the ER sometimes, in visitors who'd been handling something they couldn't admit to. The body tried to clean what the mind couldn't set down. "He's been preparing this for days," she said, "probably longer." The suite was quiet enough that the snow against the glass was almost audible. Dex Carver looked at Alaric with the expression of a man who'd reached the end of a very long calculation and arrived at a number he'd known was coming. "Clement had leverage on me," he said. "My daughter. He had her placed where?" "She's safe," Alaric said. "She was moved this afternoon." Dex's breath came out slowly. "You knew." "Not all of it. Not tonight." He looked at Dex for a moment with something that wasn't anger. It was quieter and more permanent than anger, but enough. What happened next, Neva did not watch. She had learned early that there were events which occurred at the edge of her clinical responsibility, and were meant to stay there. She looked at the snow outside the window and counted her own heartbeats until the room went still again. When she turned back, Alaric was standing in the center of the suite, jacket perfectly placed, expression composed. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the ballroom, as an object to be assessed, but the inventory had changed. He was looking at something he hadn't expected to find. "Your brother's debt is cleared," he said, "tonight." The breath she'd been managing left her in one careful, controlled release. "Thank you. Clement Farr won't be extending terms to anyone else." He didn't elaborate. "You don't need the details." "I don't want them," she said. The almost smile arrived again, and this time it made it slightly further. "Most people want the details. Most people aren't wrapping up a double catering shift on a Thursday, while also running an impromptu field toxicology test." She straightened. "Details are a luxury." He picked up her hospital ID from where she'd left it on the table and turned it over once between his fingers. He didn't hand it back. "St. Michael's," he said. 3 years. Before that? Ryerson for the nursing degree. Before that, a rental above a Tim Hortons on Queen Street, and a weekend job at a dry cleaner to make the tuition work. He looked up from the ID. "You're not what you appear to be." "Most people aren't," she said. "You're not either." "What do I appear to be?" She considered it with the same care she gave a differential diagnosis. Someone who makes decisions and doesn't revisit them. Someone who built something significant and had to become very controlled to maintain it. She paused. "And someone who was 40 seconds away from drinking poisoned whiskey without knowing it, which tells me that whoever was closest to you had decided that your control had become complacency." The suite was quiet. Below the windows, Toronto went on blazing through the snow. 3 million lives proceeding without any knowledge of what was happening on the 42nd floor. Alaric Stowe held out her hospital ID. When she reached for it, he held on for a moment. Not aggressively, just long enough to make the pause deliberate. "St. Michael's is a good hospital," he said. "But the hours are unreasonable, and I imagine the pay doesn't cover your brother's debts and your rent at the same time." "It doesn't," she said. "But I didn't go into nursing for the money." "No. You went into it because you're good at reading people, and you needed a field where that mattered." She hadn't said any of that, but she didn't correct him because he wasn't wrong. "I need someone who reads rooms the way you read them," he said. "Not a bodyguard, not a consultant in the conventional sense. Someone who can sit anywhere, any dinner, any boardroom, any function, and tell me when what's happening on the surface doesn't match what's happening underneath. Someone who understands how bodies betray what minds are trying to conceal." He glanced at her bag. "Someone who carries reagent strips to a catering shift because she trusts her instincts enough to prepare for where they lead." Neva looked at her ID still between them. "That sounds like a job." "It is. What does it pay?" "More than nursing. Most things pay more than nursing." "Considerably more than nursing," he said, with a dryness that told her he found her directness genuinely useful and had no intention of discouraging it. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the snow had committed now, soft and persistent, whitening the window ledges and softening the city's hard lines. She thought about Reese, probably awake right now, staring at the ceiling, waiting for a text that told him they were fine. She thought about her unit at St. Michael's. The Friday night trauma bay, the colleagues who'd covered her shifts when her mother was sick 3 years ago, the charge nurse who'd taught her that clinical detachment and genuine care were not opposites but a working partnership. She thought about the server at the bar cart, adjusting the decanter with gloved hands, and the way she'd stopped mid-step because something had landed wrong before she could name it, and how the decision to photograph it had taken less than 2 seconds. She'd spent her whole life trusting those 2-second decisions. They had never once been wrong. "I'll need to give proper notice to the hospital," she said. 4 weeks minimum. I won't leave my team short." Something shifted in his expression, not surprise. She didn't think surprise was something he experienced in its uncomplicated form, but a recalibration. The minor adjustment of a man who'd anticipated 3 possible responses and received a 4th. 4 weeks, he said. She took her ID from his hand. "And my brother doesn't hear about tonight," she added. "Any of it. He worries. He won't hear it from anyone in my organization." She slipped the ID back into her bag and stood, and the leather chair released her with a sound like a quiet exhale. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass, the snow was layering itself across the city incrementally, patient and indifferent, the way most significant changes arrived. Neva picked up her coat and turned toward the elevator. She had come to the Fairmont Royal York tonight with nothing. No leverage, no plan, no backup, no realistic chance of success. She had walked toward a man that sensible people fled from, carrying a nursing bag, and 3 years of hard-won clinical instinct, and the specific knowledge that the most dangerous thing you could do in a crisis was hesitate. She had not hesitated. Miss Langford. She stopped with her hand near the elevator button. "You saved my life tonight," Alaric said behind her. "I don't forget that." She thought about telling him that saving lives was simply her job. She thought about explaining that it hadn't felt heroic. Just logical, the way it always was. There was a threat. She was the one who'd noticed it, therefore she was the one who had to act. She thought about several things she could have said. Instead, she pressed the button and said, "Try to stay out of ballrooms for a while." She heard it behind her as the doors slid open, low, brief, and genuine. The laugh of a man who hadn't expected to laugh at anything tonight and was slightly off balance from it. The doors closed. In the mirror of the polished elevator wall, she caught her own reflection. Uniform creased, hair escaping its clip, the particular look of someone who'd run a very long way and hadn't quite stopped moving yet. She didn't look like someone who'd just walked out of the most dangerous room in the city. She didn't look like someone who'd just changed the course of her life entirely. She looked like a nurse finishing a long shift, which she supposed was exactly what she was.